we'll do a prayer here. Then we'll go into the book of Job, and then after that we'll take a mini break, and then we'll go into looking at the absolute Superman preview, and then we'll take another little break, and then we'll go into Metaphor, Re Fantasia. So appreciate you guys if you're watching now or if you're watching later. Um, as we do this here. So, first thing we want to do is we're going to go into prayer here. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for today and thank you for yesterday for allowing our family to get together to celebrate my aunt's life and finish boxing everything up as we say goodbye. Lord, I also want to pray for anyone out there who've lost family members or going through a tough time right now currently, and I want to lift them up in prayer. Lord, I pray that the book of Job really speaks to people. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the book here as a study, because we know the book of Job deals with loss, but not only on just loss, that it also gives a idea into who you are as our God, and that you are sovereign above all things, and that you see these pictures of our lives through real time, and you see how we our choices we make, and we see how we need to be steadfast in your strength and your mercy, and trusting in you that everything will work itself out for good. And Lord, I just pray for you to bless this time that we spend here with in fellowship, for those who are in now, coming later, for those who will watch later. I just pray that you will um, grant them peace and prosperity in knowing that you are the holy God, and that you are with each one of us that call you Father. I just want to thank you again, Father, for all that you do in our lives, and we celebrate and praise your name this holy day for this Sunday. I just want to again thank you for all you've done in your holy name through your Son Christ Jesus. Amen. All right. So we are going to kick into Job here. Give me a moment here as I will bring that up here. All right, so this week I'm going to be actually reading from the new NSAB. Last week I read from the um, ESV. So this week we're going to go into. I also did grab some commentaries from some a couple of my books I had for school that deal with Job. And I want to touch base, I want to go back to some of those commentaries and bring those up here with you guys. So I have a couple of them that worked out really, really good, that I think that might help people with the book of Job. So give me a moment here. Okay, we're going to go to here. All right. So I actually, for those who don't know, I actually have my bachelor's in biblical studies, and so I actually had some really good classes in school that really helped me formulate the historical background of the Old Testament, and how where Job as a book was written at that time frame. So I do two of the books that I used at school were the two books here. I'm going to point out here. One is called Encountering the Old Testament. So I'm going to open that up so you guys can see that. So let's go back to the main first page on this. So this one book is really good. I'm going to jump here to the cover here. Okay. So it's called Encountering the. It's part of the Encountering Biblical Study series. They actually have a whole uh, commentary book. As a Christian server, they have an Old Testament and a New Testament book, which I really recommend. Both of them are really good. Um, the uh, uh, the commentaries by Merrill and Ewell are really good, and they give a lot of really good historical understanding and the historical background of what was going on at that time frame when Job was take place. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump over here. So Job actually does fall under, in the historical context. Job falls under the what is encountering the poetic books. So we see here, like, there's a lot of parallels between, the Hebrew Bible and also the, what was going on in, say the Uritic area, Iran, we would normally call the Babylonian period, because it was at that time frame during the Babylonian exile, and right around there before the, like, between 700 and 500 is when most of the Old Testament that we know as now Scripture was compiled together. Now they have been already like, written down and stuff like that, but they were just pretty much compiled together at that time period, and most of them were already in their almost final forms before the exile for the final exile under Nebuchadnezzar, except for like Daniel, Ezekiel, and the the later prophecy books like Micah, Hosea, and stuff like that, because those all take place after Israel had returned back to the land um, in the fourth century BC. So in the 400s, and so those were those later books were compiled together in here. But we're talking about, like, the like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastics, the Song of Solomon, of course, you're looking at Jeremiah, Isaiah. All those books were pretty much compiled between the 700 and 500s of the time frame in BC. So you're going to see there was a lot of influence at that time period from the Babylonian, of course, and the Assyrians, and there's a lot of rhyming in what we would call how scripture rides together, because we tend to think that that area at this time was, oh, they didn't have influences on each other, but there is a lot that actually have influence, you know especially look at Assyria and Baal language up in northern Israel. A lot of that stuff came through, the scriptures at that time, where God's, supplanting, and he's saying, "Hey, Paul," but they'll say like Paul was the Lord of lightning and storms and stuff like that. But God's like, "No, I am." Yahweh is like, "No, I am the true God," and stuff like that. So there is a lot of you, you know uh, parallels between the thing. So what we do, the Hebrew poetry does function on, if you take a look here, some of the common characteristics. Hebrew scholars disagree over what exactly constitutes Hebrew poetry, but nevertheless, they do agree that Hebrew's poetry is a typically displays certain characteristics. Most among them, the common are meter, which of course is the rhyme or important rules. They follow a certain pattern. Parallelism, of course, is a major issue, not issue, but a major thing, and it could be like synonymous parallelism, antithetical parallelism, synthetic parallelism. For instance, we'll have, for instance, in a lot of the Psalms, you will see a lot of synonymous parallelisms, in the words used, and of course the example here they give is of Psalm 19:1. That was declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the works of His hands. So heaven and skies are the parallel, as same as declare and proclaim. So and of course another well-known one is, of course, Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So we kind of understand that, that's where we see the things with in Job. You're going to see a lot of these parallels. You're going to see a lot of these, um, of course, chiasms. You're going to see a lot of this stuff used throughout Job. But kind of want to bring that back to where um, we see a lot of those things here. Okay, now one of the things I was brought back up of, you're going to see a lot of these Uritic parallels, and this is something that you're going to see, like, especially in the biblical Hebrew, because again, you know, the Hebrews did not at that time frame did not live in a bubble. They did form a lot of their stuff together. Um, the Medes and the Persians and the Babylonians of those time had a major influence in the entire world because they had pretty much Nebuchadnezzar at that time had conquered much of the known world besides Egypt and stuff like that. So we see that that's where a lot of that's why they have a lot of influences. This is what you'll see the same thing like the creation myth of and the uh, the flood myth. We see a lot of those similarities and also the differences between like in the Old Testament. You'll you'll see that the Akkadians and you'll see that the Euritics or excuse me the Babylonians they all had the same uh, motifs, among them. The Euritics, which were, of course, the northern Assyria, Arcadia, and the cuneiform, of course, then you had the Babylonians. They all shared a very similar mythology because they were, again, like I said, they did not operate in a bubble at all. All right, so touching back to, we're going to go back here, to, of course, to Job, and we know that it is a wisdom literature, and basically there are this now in the this particular Old Testament survey, they break it down a little bit, and of course I'll show what Heinsohn shows. You know, so you also see some influence from, of course, Egyptian, because Egypt at that time also was kind of knocking on the doors a lot too of Israel. So you're not gonna again they're not gonna operate outside the bubble because you're going to have this Babylonian, this Uritic, and also the Egyptians kind of influencing how scripture was to a lot of ways. But keep in mind, at that time period, the Bible is very unique in a lot of things. Even though, like the scriptures, and I know Inspiring Philosophy did a really good layout on how the Old Testament is very different from a lot of the um, Near Eastern books, even though there's like a lot of parallelisms between the scriptures, certain things, um, you know, we know from a fact that a lot of times that the Hebrew writers functioned completely different from what the Babylonian and Uritic and Egyptian cosmos and writers were like. Because again, the Hebrews firmly believe, and of course, Christians as Christians, we echo that same mentality that God, our God, is a holy God, and He's the only God. Everyone else is actually, created beings under Him, and that would fall under the myth gods too, of Babylonian, Syria, and Egypt. Okay, so again, we see the breakdown in originally, so this commentary breaks things down, in the prologue, the dialogue. Now, we were in the first cycle of speeches last time. We had just finished on chapter 5. We had just finished, Eliphaz's reply to Job, and this today we're going to, of course, kick off with Job again. But I wanted to go back and kind of give people some of the overview of what's going on here originally, so we could talk back to what those passages were. So, give an example here. Merrill says that the opening verse of Job describes Job as blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shunned evil. Such integrity leads God to ask Satan the terse question: Have you considered my servant Job? And of course, Satan's accusatory reply marks the beginning of a series of events that results in the loss of Job's children, his substantial wealth, and even in the wake of total ruin, Job remains faithful to God. And that's really important. And then, of course, we see Satan's challenge to Job's credibility again by inserting the extreme suffering in addition to the loss of his possessions and his family will cause him to curse God, so God allows him to afflict him with painful boils all over his body. And Job sits destitute, alone in a heap of ashes, scraping his diseased skin with broken pottery. And just as we feel Job's situation cannot get any worse, of course, his wife advises him to abandon his faith, to die and curse God. But even in those dire circumstances, Job still does not sin. And then, of course, in comes, the three friends, now, here, Merrill states that the Hebrew term friend has a wide range of meanings, including intimate counselor, good friend, and despite their harsh rhetoric at times, these three friends are motivated by their love and commitment to Job, which is really true. As no, and we're going to see this, even though we see this with Eliphaz's response to Job, as much as he does love Job, and we can't state that to a fact 100% that he loves Job 100%. The problem is he still has this prejudice and misunderstanding and misguidance that was understanding during that time frame that you know he that they have this misunderstanding of who God is, and of course and it's the same thing that's going to happen with his other two friends. It's the same thing, and of course we're going to see this. Despite their harsh rhetoric at times, these three friends are motivated by their love and commitment to Job. Moved by the noblest intentions, Job's friends arrive to sympathize with him and comfort him. His suffering is so severe that they hardly recognize him, and then they sit silently for a week, mourning his loss. And of course, his lament breaks that silence, and he begins the dialogue. And of course, then we see that dialogue. And the second unit comprises of the speeches that we give, and then, of course, Job's complaint. The day he curses the day he's born, and then um, we see this response. So we're going to go back to the unit. Merle says the units. This unit contains, and this is the speeches of Job and his response to each of them. So we have just finished up Job's complaining and cursing the day that he was born. And of course, Eliphaz's response, excuse me, to Job, and then we're going to go back to his response here in a few moments here. But I just kind of, like I was saying, giving you guys. All right, so we see that again, touching back to Eliphaz is, of course, reminds Job of God's justice, his humanity, his inability to live up to God's holy standard. And of course, he encourages Job to find the comfort in his chastening and not and to expect the restoration to his lost estate. And of course, Job is of course replying back to him and saying, "Hey, yeah, you are not helping the situation at all." And all right, so that's what Merle states. So I'm going to jump over here to the other Old Testament survey. Of course, I do have a couple other commentaries I just want to address here. Let's see here. I got to figure out here where in chapter 6, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Samuel, poetic books. And this book is one that I really recommend. Dr. Heinsohn was one of my favorite teachers at Liberty University. Unfortunately, he has such passed and gone to the Lord. But his um, okay, is this where I want to be on chapter 21? Yeah, here we go. Okay, all right. So Heinz goes in and says, we're looking at this again. We see the dialogue and lamenting. Of course, again, Job's lament breaks the silence between his friends and introduces the dialogue. And of course, the prologue states that Job did not curse God because of his suffering, but Job clearly did not mince his words in cursing the day he is born. After the weakest silence allows time for reflection, a shift occurring in Job's reaction to his suffering, and Job opens his mouth by cursing and questions why God would allow him to be born if his only plan is to bring him to a place of such intense suffering. And that, unfortunately, is a big thing. And this is why I wanted to, this is why I'm stressing this week as, are you weak and weary? Because that's the thing is a lot of us are struggling right now. We have a really not just with of course the election coming up, but a lot of people today are feeling the pinch of life. Things are much harder. Now I'm one on the side. I think that we go through these cycles where there was a time period where life was pretty hard, even back in the 90s and stuff like that. But today's a lot more harder, especially for the younger people. A lot of people have lost their jobs again, especially depending on what industry you're in and stuff like that. So a lot of people are going through these intense sufferings, and a lot of times Job is a great book to come back to because we are looking at Job feels that he's suffering and why he is dealing with this. And again, he's not cursing God. He doesn't see God as blameless in this whole thing, which is why he wishes that he would die. Of course, Eliphaz is the one who you, you know stresses that God, it is God's justice to why this is happening, and this is so Job has done something to um initiate that response. Okay. So let's see here. Okay. So the downside is this one book right now, with the Old Testament, essence of the Old Testament, these are kind of just overviews of the book and stuff like that to kind of give you um, an overview. So, and this is one of the things I want people to keep in mind. So I'm going to read the theological significance of what Job is for. As a wisdom literature, Job functions to address one's wisdom most perplexing theological challenges. Why do the righteous suffer? While the reader of Job get a glimpse into the affairs of the supernatural realm, the question of suffering remains one of life's mysteries. Suggestions are made throughout the book to explain human suffering, some with greater merit than others. The Old Testament teaches as a principle retribution theology, the idea that God will exalt the righteous and cut down the sinner. Of course, we're pointing to Psalm 1. However, wisdom literature observes many exceptions to this general rule. See Ecclesiastes 8:14, such as Hebrew wisdom sought to address the complexities of a failed justice in a world governed by an omnipotent God. The epilogue of Job makes it clear that the strict retribution of the three friends of Eli, of course, means Eleazar and Elud, and of course, or excuse me, Eleazar, Bildad, and Zophar, were wrong. And in a case, in Job's case, and in this certainly holds true in many cases, the suffering experienced through history, their wrong perspective reminds us not to judge others too quickly, or else we fall into the same hypocritical trap. Ehud's suggestion that suffering can be used as a form of a preventive measure against sin is certainly valid. Scripture clearly affirms that the suffering can be a chastisement for sin. See Hebrews 12, 7 through 11. But it can also be permitted by a loving God, as the Apostle Paul attests to in 2 Corinthians 12:7 through 9, as he affirms God's promise that his grace is sufficient for our every need. At the end of the main point of the book in Job is that God is just, however the circumstances may be appear to man. Thus, man is called to trust God in spite of his circumstances. All right, so yeah, so of course, we're gonna jump back here to there's another commentary, Hartley's commentary on the Book of Job. So this is a straight commentary on him. So we want to go, and we're gonna jump to, of course, the dialogue here. So I want to go back to. So we're gonna go to 3. All right. So we saw that in the first course. We saw in the first cycle that Job cursing the day. Of course, we see, of course, Eliphaz's speech here, and his. Of course, we see, as stated here in the commentary, his rhetoric is filled with wide variety of form and proverbs, parables, analogies, precepts, exhortations, wisdom sayings, hymns, and a vision report. With all these rhetoric devices, he convincingly argues for the orthodox understanding of suffering as a retribution for wrongdoing and adds a greater authority to his teaching, which is 100% true. And this is where, he's getting trapped into the legalism of everything here. Now, we want to also point out here that Eliphaz's central premises is that everyone's guilty of error, and from this premise, he devises two basic arguments. First, he boldly articulates the law of retribution, that the righteous prosper and the wicked suffer hardship in this life and face premature death. Second, he lauds God's greatness and compassion and care in developing his own from sorrow. Loss and suffering are not a final tragedy, for God will rescue anyone who's repentant from their grip, and he will bestow abundance of blessing. Therefore, misfortune presents as an opportunity for the afflicted to discover hidden errors and to seek God's compassion through contrition. And you'll see that all the way through, chapter 4. So we want to go through we're go to chapter 5, of course. We go all the way through there, that response here, and of course we're going to go to chapter 6 here, which we're going to do oh, was it that? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up chapter 6 here. All right, and of course again, that's a NSAB. I'm reading the 1995 version. So then Job answered, "Oh, that my grief were actually weighed and laid in the balances together with my calamity." So balances is a very big important thing, because this is a actual uh, thought that in that time frame, that that in that time period, that they believe scales, everything was working on scales, in balance and stuff like that. uh, One, you can look at the Egyptian and mythology on the afterlife and stuff like that, where a person's soul is weighed on weights and balances. All right, for then it would be heavier than the sea sands of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash, for the arrows of the Almighty are within me. Their poison my spirit drinks. The terror of God is arrayed against me. Does the wild donkey bray over his grass, or does the ox low over his fodder? Can something tasteless be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them, and they are like loathsome food to me. Oh, that my request might come to pass, and that God would grant my longing. Would God that God would be willing to crush me, and that He would lose His hand and cut me off? But that is still my consideration, or my consultation, excuse me, and I will rejoice in the unsparing pain that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. What is my strength that I should wait? And what is my end that I should endure? Is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh bronze? Is it that my help is not within me, and that deliverance is driven from me? For the despairing man there should be kindness from his friend, and that he does not forsake the fear of the Almighty. My brothers have acted deceitfully like a wadi, like the torrents of the Wadis which vanish, and which are turbid because of the ice and into the snow melts, and when they become waterless they are silent, and when it is hot they vanish from their places. The path of their course wind along, they go up into nothing and perish. The caravans of Tema looked, and the travelers of Sheba hoped for them. And they were disappointed, for when they had trusted, they had come there and were confounded. Indeed, you have become such. You see terror and are afraid. Have I give me something? Have I said give me something? Or offered a bribe for me from your wealth? Or deliver me from the hands of my adversary? Or redeem me from the hands of the tyrant? Teach me, and I will be silent, and show me how I have erred. How painful are the honest words! But what does your argument prove? Do you not to intend? Do you intend to reprove my words, when the words of one in despair belong to the wind? You would even cast lots for the orphan and barter over your friend. Now please look at me and see if I lie to your face. Desist now, for there is no injustice. I even desist, my righteousness is yet in it. Is there any injustice on my tongue? Cannot my palate concern calamities? All right. All right, so that was chapter 6. So we're going to go, look at the commentaries on here. And again, Job is, if you look at all these things, if you're looking at the wisdom and stuff like that, there is these parallels and stuff like that. Of course, can anything tasteless eat without salt? And as you know, in that time frame, salt was a highly commodity. So these are the contrasts right here. Can something be tasteless to be eaten without salt, or is there any taste in the white of an egg? In the whites of the egg, there is really no flavor. So that's why we put salt on the eggs. And we see then, of course, God would grant him his lung, and then he would be crushed and loosen his hand and cut him off. That is what Job is ultimately wishing for. So okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at this here. All right. So of course, Job, Job is dealing with these, these speeches of outbursts with emotion. Of course, in this dramatic way, visibly, giving this huge scale of how his comfort. He's giving these extremes and these parallels. You know, um, Here it says, let's see here. So Hartley says, give me a second here. I want to see if I can do maybe. Can I do two books here? I wonder if I could do two books. Okay, can I run this twice? Nope. All right. I was hoping I could I could run them both at the same time. Okay. So he's giving he's giving all these parallels and stuff like that. As I said here, this picture offers a marked contrast to the Egyptian image of weighing the dead deceased person's heart against the feather of justice. Job chooses the word vexation in the Hebrew kaias, I believe, and as the first word in his agony in order to respond to Eliphaz, whereas Eliphaz says vexation like chaos to kill a fool. Job retorts by admitting that he is sorely grieved and vexed, but he denies that he is thus the fool. And then he, of course, he uses metaphor and that God is the super marksman, and that he causes his spirit Ruha to drink deeply of their poison, and God's terrors are arrayed against me. So Job is saying God's like this mighty general, as Hartley's saying that God is like a general who marshals a mighty army against a well fortified city and has arrayed him in armies of terror. And we see this like I guess with like how your equivalent human equivalent would be how Alexander the Great or Nebuchadnezzar would march into battle with their troops. Of course, again, he's saying that God is slinging these things and he has a purpose for it. And he feels that he's no longer in that relationship with God, and God is acting them. He feels that God's acting towards him as he was merely a target, not as a servant or as a son of God. Okay, now we see here. I'm going to jump back over to let's see what Anderson says here, and this is, of course, the Tyndale's commentary of Francis Anderson. A lot of the commentaries here are a little bit older, and so they tend to be fairly good in their commentaries of things. All right, so let's jump here. Let me see what he says. The gulf between Job and his colleagues appears more to appear and form theological arguments or consensus. They concur completely. The supreme truth that God is sovereign. Nowhere in this entire book is this question, yet Job's thoughts are on a different level from theirs. Even if their same formal expression is that comes to the character of God in his dealing with men, or exactly in his dealing with Job. Um, Okay, and again, so Anderson is saying Job's terrified using the words used in verse 4c is not the same as in verse 7:14, which describes the armament of God set in a battle array against him. This image of God is as a chariot riding archer goes back again, like I said, Middle Bronze Age warfare. Where like Alexander the Great and Nebuchadnezzar and these guys actually the Pharaoh, they went into battle. They did not sit in the back, and they did not. Um, and they did not. How can I say this? Did not sit back and did not engage in battle. No, they actually, most cases they were out there leading their troops physically, and this is how it's been done for thousands and thousands of years. So here we're looking at God is he's a literary figure, and that Job is terrified that God is you know raining these terrible arrows, and he struggles. He's struggling with how God could do this to him. But again, he's not cursing God. He's just struggling him. And we see that dichotomy throughout the thing. All right, let's see here. What else? Let's go to verse 8 and stuff like that. Verse 8 9. We're gonna look at that real quick here. Actually go back here to verse 7 real quick. We see verse 7. We see him dealing with these. Okay, since Job is concerned with God rather. Since Job is concerned with God rather than with Eliphaz, it is not certain that these remarks were attack on his friend's recent speech, but it is commonly assumed that through this burden of verses 14 through 30, the theme of taste appears at the end. Of course, at this point, Job also obviously prays, and he is encouraged to entrust his problem with God in 5:8. Job only has one desire, which is already expressed in chapter 3. It is to die. And if God were really compassionate, he would crush him at once. And this is something as myself, that I have experienced, and yeah, just recently, there are plenty of times that I felt the weight of the world on top of my shoulders, and I felt um, overburdened, and I have asked the Lord, just crush me, Lord, just I'm tired, I'm you know, I know if you were compassionate, you would crush me so that I would be spared from the suffering. But then I'm reminded, that we are called to be in some sort of suffering because that's what Christ did. Christ had suffering, and we are never promised an easy life. But again, Job is saying that he could. God would crush him at once. Of course, verse 9a. He could do this effortlessly as a weaver sniffs off the thread. So is completely is God's sole power over life and death. Recognize that the thoughts of suicide as a remedy for. So completely is God's sole power over life and death. Recognize that the thought of suicide as a remedy for one life ills never enters the book of Job, as in contrast to the ancient pessimist and later stoic. Um, so basically, we're not saying that we want to take our own lives. That we're asking God. He has complete control over life and death. That He'd be the one that would crush us if it's His will and determine. And we need to recognize that God could do that to us at a moment's notice. But but God gives us that hope to get through that point. Um, Now we go to verse 10. We say here, let me bring back up my, okay, verse 10. He said, but it's still my consolation, and that I have rejoiced the unsparing pain, that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. So we see here that, the way I take it is, that Job still would not curse, even though he knows how hard his life is, and that he wished God would crush him. He, uh, he would not profane God. Now, uh, Anderson states that, of course, the text is difficult and no solution is in sight. The RSV does a fairly well translation, but Job is somehow accused of denying is has not been accused of denying the words of the Holy One, unless he sensed it in Eliphaz's lecture and hinted that Job somehow is at fault. And if so, he's already insisting that he will to the end. He is not aware of any failure, and the line is preparation for the challenge in verse 24. Under these conditions, God owes it to Job to release him from his agony as a tribute to his faithfulness. Unfortunately, the meaning of the root uh, is unknown, and that's of the Greek word or the Hebrew word exult. So that's what Anderson said. So I want to go back here. Let's see what Harley states. All right. Okay. All right. So Hartley states that Job has based his petition on the fact that he has not concealed nor denied the words of the Holy One. In this way, he is affirming his innocence and using this affirmation as a base for his prayer. Job's motivation for this petition is to know that God accepts him as a faithful service and not to get rid of his pain at any cost. If God hastens his death, it will be a witness to all that God has heard them and grant his prayer. So again, and it comes back to, and even it states here in the previous passage, Job believes. Okay, uh, in describing his cursed lament as his hope, Job is countering the words of Eliphaz. And Eliphaz thought Job's hope should be his upright life, or in the assurance that God delivers individuals from troubles. Excuse me. But Job believes that his only hope is in death itself. Nevertheless, he resolutely rejects suicide if death is to come. It must come from God, and that's very important. That God's calling us. He does not want us to take our lives. If it is our will, if it's His will for us to die early, that's His will. If it's His will to live life, and I've had to come from that resolution in my life multiple times. When I was younger, I was explaining to someone in a chat a few days ago. When I was young, my mother died when I was 11, and I was in a very bad position, and I did attempt to take my life several times. And fortunately, God had somebody there who was able to find me in time multiple times, and so I was able to survive that. And I realized that is God wasn't done with me. He wanted to use me in a different way. Now, I'm not saying my walk with Christ has been perfect, and I've gone through a lot of ups and downs, but I now know that if it's God's will, he will he will be the one to take my life, not me. So Job is saying that if death is to come, it must come from God, and if he knew his death were near and certain, the present suffering would have been a little bit easier to bear. For it is for the fact that God answered this prayer, and it itself would be some sort of consolation. He would leap up, though it would filled with unsparing pain, a word particularly used for labor pains. So we see that. So Job again, it rejects what Eliphaz is saying, that he has not denied God, and he will not repent for that. And that's really very important for us that, as believers, to understand that no matter how much that life hits us, with things, it is important for us to keep moving on. And again, those valleys, there's a psalm that where one of the psalmists is talking about how he's dealing with these very hard times, and he's in this very deep valley, and he's vexing, he's calling out to the Lord, and he's struggling with how he's going through these valleys. He's in this valley, and he can't see that there's this end. And he talks about, like, that he's not feeling there's this end, and all of a sudden he then realizes in this valley that God's still there, and he talks about how eventually, according to Scripture, God will take care of those who are um the wicked and the evil and stuff like that, and the person is able to start climbing up out of that valley, and he realizes, and as he gets to the top of the valley, he's able to praise God. He looks back and he sees that God's with him that entire time, and that's actually where the poem Footprints kind of gets its base off of. That Christ is carrying us through those mountains and valleys. A lot of times we tend to think, oh, we're in the valley, we don't need God, or we're on the mountain and top, and we don't need God. And God, we tend to think we got there ourselves. And it's when you're in those valleys and you're starting to come back up, because life is going to be like that. You're going to hit these high mountains and you're going to hit these low valleys. And what happens is you see that God is in that step every time. All right. So we keep going through that, and then he continues. Job continues to dealing different providing different commentary here on the different things. So let's jump back over to Hartley here. So we're going to go in the next thing. So the next set of questions that Job addresses here is he has some rhetorical questions. We see here for the despairing man, or actually, excuse me, what is my strength that I should wait? It is my end. What is my end that I should endure? Is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh bronze? Is that my help is not within me, and that deliverance is delivered from me? So he's seeing that the fact that he thinks that his strength is not adequate for him to keep waiting for God to answer, and because of his end, he has no patience to be wait. And you know give me a second here. It says here, because of the clear answer to these questions is no, Job is unable to go through this trial in silence. Job's experience stands in sharp contrast, of course, to Jeremiah, where God promises Jeremiah he would make him a fortified city, a pillar of iron, a wall of bronze against all who would persecute him. But Job has not received any such promise to sustain him during his ordeal. And of course, we know that his affliction is sapping everything from him, and that everything he has been driven away from him. And his complaint is that the loss of strength adds to the support of his defense of intense bitterness. And Job's longing is to experience in his life what the psalmist experienced. My comfort is in my suffering, and then this is your promise that renews my life. And then of course he of course he goes back into dealing with his friends. Now he is much calmer in this dealing. Again, we see here, but he is accusing them of failing to fulfill the obligations of their covenant relationship. And Hartley says here that though Job accuses his partners of failing to the obligation of their covenant relationship, 14 through 23, the change of tone that indicates that he is hopeful for reconciliation, Job seeks to move his friends to soften their rhetoric and teach him his errors. And of course, we don't see that at all as we look through, the next two responses from his friends. It just doesn't end. It's always they're always hitting him that hey, you're the reason, you're the problem, not God. That you have this unidealized understanding of who God is and how God operates. And again, it's the wrong way. The free friends actually have the wrong view on who God is. And we of course we see that again through 6 through 14, 14 through 23, that we see this response of Job with his friend Eliphaz. All right, and now he goes in here at the end here, which I really want to point out here is on verse 27. We see that soon you will cast lots over the blameless and barter over your friend. But now please look at me, for surely I will not lie to your face. Relent. Do not allow false testimony. Relent. My cause is just. Is there any false testimony on my tongue? Does not my palate discern deceptive words? So Job is trying, if you go back even further, and he says, "Teach me, and I'll be silent." This is verse 24. Teach me, and I'll be silent. Make me understand on how I've erred, and words, how are upright words grievous. And what does your arguing prove? Do you not to intend to prove me with words? And when words of a despairing man are to be counted as winds. And so here we're looking at, Job is trying to draw out that sympathetic uh, for his understand, of what he's going through, and he's saying like, hey, this is, and this is something we as Christians need to really be wise. Sometimes, you know, it's better not to say anything at all. And when someone is going through pain, sorrow, or we tend to want to always give some sort of word of encouragement and stuff like that. Sometimes it's just better to say nothing. Period. Nothing at all. Sometimes it's okay to say, give person, say, you know, I don't understand. Let me pray with you. Other times, we can say, hey, we can have that person who's going through something say, look, I've been through the same thing. Here's how I handle it. This is what God has shown me. But and we see this, a lot of times. I mean, we saw that Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar started out really good for that whole week. They said nothing for a whole week, and they just sat there with Job. But then, of course, when Job, started his soliloquy, and then, of course, the three friends do their thing. Excuse me, I'm sorry, guys. Um, so here again, Hartley saying, in a dramatic change of mood, Job seeks a sympathetic guidance from his friends. He asks them to teach him as wise teachers, offering gentle instructions rather than fierce lawyers arguing his guilt. If they instruct him kindly, he will be silent, attentive to their instruction. Thereby, they could ease his pain and help him overcome his alienation from God. Job wants to learn where he has erred. And this word, the erred, in the Hebrew tongue, which is um, which is okay. So here it actually says hallelujah. It's the Hebrew word hallelujah. Um, uh, this word often refers to unattended. Okay, well that doesn't seem right there. Okay, Haga, of course, with the things. This word refers to unintentional sins. Such sins, though committed unknowingly, must still be atoned for upon becoming known. See reference Leviticus 4 through 5. And through this dialogue, Job never denies the possibility that he has sinned, but rather he denies having sinned so grievously as upon his suffering seems to indicate. It's no wonder he uses such a mild word for any possible sin. If there were some significant error that could be pointed out, he wants to know that what it is and that he can take care of it. All right. And of course, Job then, of course, wonders why, that the friends think they can reprove him with words when they counted his words to be only wind. Um, and he's painting such an unjust behavior because of their disposition, and then they're serving a warning to danger such as unsympathetic attitude. And those with the attitude use a judicial system to their own advantages to squeeze the most out of someone indebted to them. Though the party is innocent, blameless person, even a friend, mercilessly they cast lots over their victims or barter over him in order to get the most out of him with any regards to his feelings. In ancient society where the party was indebted, the creditor might cast lots over his friends or even his children to select which would be sold against the debt. Again, this is why we see the soldiers gambling over Jesus's clothes. It's the same language that to them that Christ's garments were a they're they were trying to squeeze out as much as they could to again for those things. So basically, equivalent is just like these scalpers that we have today in society who gets these new things that are coming out, electronics or collectibles, and they just scalp the most money they can out of people. And this is the same language being used here that Job is saying, hey, you need to be a little bit more sympathetic. Are you trying to cast lots over me and blame me for what is going on, even though that I am blameless? And it does seem harsh, uh, but we know from the language being used that Eliphaz is consenting in his attitude, and of course we'll see that more as the dialogue goes on and on. And now the this is where, of course, Job again confronts them in the verse 28 or 28 or 29, 20, 30. Job, is asking a double-redded question that denies that he's lied in any way and that there's no false testimony on his tongue. And he can still discern deceptive words, and he's conscious of his truth. Now I'm gonna go back over here to Anderson. Anderson states the same, close to the same thing. Um, that um, he's using a legal oath, and basically he insists that he can distinguish the validity of his position and the invalidity of their own. And this assumes that the reference to my tongue and my taste and my palates is a figure for discernment. So again, Job is saying, "Hey, I'm telling you the truth that I'm not lying. I did not sin." And this is where they're struggling. I'm gonna jump over to see if they have here in. Okay, they don't have anything in here. Okay, I want to see if they have anything in the Bible. Okay. Book to file. Let's see here. I know I have. All right. I had a couple more commentaries, but I got to see here. Mm, okay, Hartley. I wanted to bring up another commentary. Um, Okay. Yeah. So basically, but it is almost like Job is saying about his good word that hey, I did not lie. He's using this oath that this is who I am. You guys know I didn't lie. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah. So okay, those did not have any additional commentaries. Okay. All right. So we're gonna move on to chapter 7 here. All right. Okay, is not man forced to labor on earth, and are not his days like the days of a hired man? As a slave who pants for the shade, as a hired hand who eagerly waits for his wages, so am I allotted a month of vanity, and the nights of trouble are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, When shall I arise? But the night continues, and I am continuously tossed about until dawn. My flesh is torn, or my flesh is covered with worms and crust of dirt. My skin hardens and runs. My days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle, and it comes to an end without hope. Remembering that my life is but breath, and my eyes will not see good again will not see good, and that the eyes of him who see me will behold me no longer, and your eyes will be on me, and I will not be. When the cloud vanishes, it is gone. So he that goes down to Sheol does not come up. And this is a very important verse. I'm going to address on here a lot. Um, that this passage here can refute a lot of modern day stuff here. He will not return again to his house, nor will his place know him any more. Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth, and I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. I am the sea and the sea monster, that you set a guard over me. And if I say, my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you will frighten me with visions or with dreams and terrify me by visions, so that my soul will choose suffocation, death rather than my pains. I waste away and I will not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but breath. What is the man that you magnify him, and that you are concerned about him? That you examine him at every moment, and then to try him at every moment. Will you never turn your gaze away from me, nor let me alone as until I swallow my spittle? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am burdening myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgressions and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me, but I will not be. Okay. All right. So we're gonna go back here and jump back over here to commentaries. Let me do. Okay, Job. So we need to jump to Job 7 here. Okay, so if we look, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna we want to touch here on the first. If you look at verse 1 through 5 here, we see that this is Job's comparing his life like that of a hired servant, or in that term frame, either a slave or a hired man. We see here, a hired man, um, a slave pants for the shade, and then that hired man who eagerly waits for his wages. So we see this as okay. Now, during the words commentary states that here Job saw his present suffering like the futile, discouraging work of a servant or a hired man. He felt that there was no hope or rewards, only weariness. And the words hard service, of course, in here of denotes that the descriptive military service and that we see that Job is communicating with the struggles of life together with the idea that he's been drafting unwillingly into this battle. So what we're looking at here again, that Hartley saying kind of the similar, the same thing. Uh, that both slave and the hired man, gets compensated for their work. The shade is for the servant, and of course the monetary gain for the hired worker. And Job is comparing that analogy that he's suffering. And of course, again, here's what it says: this analogy emphasizes the weakness and servitude of human beings in general. Three nouns depict the relationship of a laborer to his master. Term of service. The first noun, saba, refers to forced service. It was primarily used for military service, but it could also mean conscripted labor, as in here. The noteworthy example of forced labor was the corps drafted by Solomon to serve 1 month out of every three in Phoenicia felling timber. And of course, we see that in Kings 5:27 through 28. Kind of the same thing where we see in Egypt where uh, the uh, the Egyptians were under conscription service to build the pyramid. Um, they would have fell under the conscription service. Um, Now, they would not have been considered slaves in this term purpose. Now, the terms that we do see the term slave in the connotation where we see here in the give me a second here. Gotta always jump my screens here. We see here is not here we see verse 1, just right away, is man not forced to labor upon the earth. So there right there is that original language of him being forced into labor. um and not saying that labor is not a bad thing, but this is what they're discussing. The next two deal with uh, the slave service, which is the third term. Uh, Anyone who was forced to sold into debt to pay off their any of their debts and stuff like that, and that was what they were forced to. Now the hired worker would go under domestic workers. In here it says these workers were usually poor. Leviticus 25:40 often hired themselves out 1 day at a time for meager wages that scarcely provide daily food for their families. In the morning, they would gather the other laborers in the market and wait patiently to be hired for the day. And because of their poverty, it was imperative that they get paid at the end of the day so they could buy food for the evening meal. So, of course, our modern concept of how we do our wages and stuff like that is completely different. In that day, you know, they would work and get paid right at the end of the day. Our modern concept is a lot different. Even throughout most of human history, that's how wages worked. You work for a day and you got paid at the end of the day. Our concept here in the 20th century is completely different compared to then. Um, so Job is saying that when you look at what these types of service requires, these different, the forced conscription, the hired worker, or the slave, Job is saying that hey, all my suffering is greater than what those uh, are dealing with. Because they at least are getting something. He's not getting anything, and he's made to suffer this because of the sins of his forefathers and stuff like that. So Job is again hinting at these. Uh, so we also see here that they point out that that the knights and going here we want to go back here one page here and read here says thus I have inherited months of emptiness and nights of misery that are allotted to me. And Hartley hints that possibly that this may have been um, quite some time. That here, according to 5:9 on 5:9, that his trials While Job length of Job's illness is unknown, the Testament of Job 5:9 states that his trial lasted for 7 years. This dialogue is not concerned with the length of Job's trial, however, it does force on its interpersonal spiritual dimensions. So it so really that possibly Job may have suffered that this went on for quite some time. You know, now in dealing with when you're dealing with, of course, wisdom and poetry, a lot of times things are condensed down at a time. We see the opening passage about his family coming to him, or his servants coming to him saying, "Hey, you lost this. Hey, you lost this. Hey, your children were killed." Um, it seems like they kind of all happened at once, but we know for a fact that that didn't happen. That's that time compression that happens within the Bible. Where it does seem to be there's some time, that happens, that where this happened over possibly a period of months, in the original part, and then, you know, uh, while Job is suffering, and of course, we see then it most likely took time for his friends to come, so yeah, this is why we're seeing that possibly, if it is 7 years, that it's a good understanding, especially with that passage, that his time was considered to him of months of emptiness, and the nights of misery are allotted to him. So yeah, there's a lot of support there for that. And again, that he's you know we also see that all these things happening. Here we see Job saying he's not getting rest, and he's tossing and turning, his mind's wandering. Um, Now he's seeing that he's become the night passes so slowly, and in the stillness he becomes conscious of every pain in his body. And in the morning light, Job discovers that worms have bred into his sores. Hard scabs have crusted over around the swords of his skin, only to break and ooze, leaving his skin painfully raw. This vivid description gives some insight into multiple physical complications of Job's illness: fever, sleeplessness, delirium, skin ulcers, and running sores infested with worms. So we don't know what Job's thing is. It could possibly be that um if we had to point to a disease, and let me see what if anybody has any speculation. What was Job's illness? Okay, so here's somebody speculates, and actually has a syndrome. Hyperimmune globulin E syndrome is a rare primary immune deficiency distinguished by clinical trials of isotomic metrics, recurring infections, and recurring pulmonary infections. Okay. So it looks like possibly that it was, this rare. I mean, now we kind of given the same thing. Let's see here. Okay, so it was immune deficiency, according to, it looks like, and this is actually why they called it um, a Job syndrome, because it looks like it was immune deficiency that he has. Of course, now they're saying it is the disease is characterized by elevated IgE levels with an early onset in primary childhood. Now, of course, we know that Job did not have this in his childhood, and he was actually healthy. So we know that most likely that Satan, the supernatural God, gave him this particular illness. Um, um, but I suspect he probably had multiple things. I mean, again, we just we speculate exactly what it could be. But uh, okay, so there actually is. The thing is, it's actually so very rare. There's only 300 cases currently in literature. So okay, that's. But yeah, so a lot of times, we see these infection. We're seeing this physical pain that Job is dealing with. He's getting his infections have, of course, infested with worms, and of course, that's because of how bad the infection gets is when you get the worms. So Job then, of course, goes. He says, "My life. Remember that my life is a mere breath, and my eyes will not experience pleasure. Will not again experience pleasure." So he he's saying to himself that, hey, and as you go through these different things, um, that he is not going to see these rewards, these good things in life because of his this disease, and how his symptoms are, and how he's dealing with these pains and stuff like that. Um, we go here. It says Job had no hope for any pleasant moment. His wages, so to speak, would be the taste of life's joys once again. The desire for life is a basic human drive that finds rewards in the enjoyment of pleasant experiences. As expressed in Psalms 34:13, who is the man that delights in life and loves many days that he may experience pleasure? Thus, Job's request is simple and basic. He longs to experience again the joys of normal life before death robs him of life. Now, we also see this here where he says, "So he who descends to Sheol does not ascend." So, so this passage, while dealing with death and stuff like that, you, you know in that day and age, that there was no coming back from once you went into Sheol. And of course, at this point, we're also seeing here, verse 7. He's addressing God. Job is hoping that God would again respond to him. And he says this imperative signals that Job is now addressing God directly. Job hopes that God will respond to his present dilemma in conformity with his prior commitments to him. To one who fears God, it means that God will act towards him compassionately and will cease being silent, and it will become involved in the petitioner's deliverance. My life is but a mere breath, a vapor that vanishes quickly. And Job is wishing that God would become more mindful of the transit nature of his life, and that realize that his servant is close to the limits of what his body can endure. And of course, we see that again. That he's saying he'll never experience pleasures of life again. He'll never, uh, if God does cut him off, he's going to, God's going to lose out on this, um, the death of Job. And again, this is where we deal with Job is saying he wants God to realize the extreme urgency of his request. His life is now utterly worthless and is about to pass with no lasting meaning. He who descends to Sheol does not ascend. Job knows he's about to die and descend to Sheol, and a person X out a ghostly existence, no longer able to do good or to do praise, because he never returns home. From an ancient perspective, no one returns from Sheol. Never again will Job oversee the management of his house, love his children, his neighborhood, his place, and will no longer have him frequenting it. So we see that again, that once you're dead, you're dead. In the old text, now of course, in the New Testament understanding, we know it's kind of the same thing. To be absent of the body is present with the Lord. So we know that when Christians die, we go to heaven right away. So there is no returning to the thing. And Job is saying that, yeah, God's going to lose out because he's not able to sing or praise or do good. Again, that was from the ancient Hebrew understanding and stuff like that. Whereas, in the modern context of Christians, we understand that going to heaven, God's going to see our glory, and He's going to have our glory each and every day. All right. So again, then we go on to Job is given his complaint against God, and he says, "Indeed, shall I not restrain my mouth? I shall speak in the anguish of my spirit, and I shall complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I the sea or the sea serpent that you would set guard over me? Whenever I think that my bed will comfort me, my couch will help me bear my complaint. You scare me with dreams and visions. You terrify me. Therefore, my throat chooses strangling, my bones death. I despise it, and I will not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are a vapor." Again, Job is trying to lament how God is treating him and how God is doing. It's like, why is He still putting him through this? Um, Here in verse 12, it says, "In the style of the examination of the plaintiff, Job caustically asked God why He has set a guard over him, and it appears that God must consider him a formidable opponent compared to that the sea yam or to the sea serpent Tannin, drawing on the rich mythopoeic imagery of the primordial conflict. And that primordial conflict, of course, is the sea serpent and being killed by an angel, and that's the ancient mythology, like Tiamat. Of course, in Hebrew mythology, would be the Leviathan. Um, and then, of course, Job is then we go into here. Job says that he wonders if God has treated him so harshly because he fears that he is a cosmic foe. Now, the footnote on that. Give me a second here. Okay, it doesn't have the footnote on that. Nope. All right, I was hoping that maybe had a footnote on. Okay, so Anderson is kind. Let's see. Go back here to what Anderson is saying here. Okay, so we look here on. So Anderson states in verse 8 and 10. We'll touch that first here. Problem in verse 8, which of course we see modern commentaries have discarded. The desire to see God is central to Job's needs. He expressed it clearly in 1927 before he is satisfied in 42:5. God must first look on Job. Similarly, reversing the sequence of 5:1, God must first call before Job can answer. This is the importance of the verse as a whole. Job cannot possibly be exaggerated. Since not verse 9 and 10 emphasize the finality of death, which there is no return. Verse 8 seems to imply that God himself, as well as Job, human acquaintances, might find out that that's too late. Um, Again, we're looking at the same thing here. Job does his prayer, and he says, "Do you think I'm the Yamin or Tanin, and that you're trying to muzzle me?" Yam, and here Anderson, Yam was the sea as a god, and the association of the sea monster are the worst enemies of God in the old story. The name points to a Canaanite, rather Mesopotamian background. Job has no idea what he might have done to incur the extreme hostility of God, and it's ludicrous to suggest that Job in any way a threat to God, like the prime evil chaos. And of course, you say no, no. Same sleep is not a release from the pain and suffering. And we go in here. Let's see here. Of course, then we see um, when we're talking about verse 15, the strangling refers to the like a dream sensation rather than choking, connecting to the Joe's physical disease. It assumes uh, they're assuming that Job is already saying that he would prefer to die than go through suffering and taking into considerable liberties, which brings the thought out more clearly. That's up for the translation. Was needed to sing with the original text. Once my soul is taking his eye and complete. Strangling should be taken in concrete to refer as the strangler. This is death, the Mot. Another great Canaanite god, like the one in verse 12, my bones can be taken literally without changing to my suffering. The background of the image is even found in the theme of Mot as a lion mauling Baal as the bull, which is again, the Canaanite mythology. So there, we were looking at that parallel. I was talking about parallels that they're using these Canaanite mythologies and stuff like that, profusely illustrated in Near Eastern iconography, ivories, and seals and coins. In Israel theology, Yahweh embraces all the functions of all the old gods, including the lordship of the underworld. So it's no surprise that he's clearly describing dealing out death like a lion ripping apart his victim. See Hosea 5:14 as a literal translation, and selected strangler my neck, death, bones. This is death. The strangler has chosen the bones of my neck, which was such a joke. Thing is dream. Sorry about that. So I would definitely and we're gonna kind of end it here with this here. I would really suggest if you guys want to, I'm gonna put links to the commentaries here with Anderson and Hartley. They're really good to help out there. I'll get links for those into the description, so that way, if you're on YouTube, of course, you'll be able to link that to there. But again, we see Job. Job is struggling here, and he doesn't understand why he this is he this pawn in this mythical battle. And of course, we're going to be dealing with more, when Bildad comes into his response to what Job is saying. And we know again, Job is lamenting him through all this pain and suffering, and he's not understanding. Yeah, he is a pawn in a cosmological battle between God and Satan. And of course, we know for God it's really not a battle because God's going to win. God wins ultimately. Satan really has no power to what God actually gives him. So it's important that we look at a lot of times we're going through all these struggles, but there is a reason why we go through these struggles. It's important. It forms us as a character, and we understand who God is. And he's like, and I know it's one of the common misconceptions a lot of people have in today's society about why we struggle. Why does God allow suffering to people for people? You know, uh, why does he allow the good people to suffer, or why does he allow good? Now, keep in mind when he's talking about good people, this is people who are upright and blameless, but they still suffer. This is not talking about good from the human standpoint that we look at good and evil. Uh, this is a person who is following again. Job's suffering here also kind of mirrors what Christ went through at the garden, where Christ was anguishing about him going to the cross. And so we see a lot of how God uses these sufferings for his purposes and stuff like that. All right, well, I thank you guys for sticking through me with there on that commentary. Again, if you guys are interested, um, the commentaries that I looked at today, I highly recommend if you get the Old Testament commentaries, like the two survey books. They are actually very good. So I use the IPB Bible Background Commentary, Encountering the Old Testament, a Christian Survey, The Essence of the Old Testament, a survey, the Book of Job by Hartley commentary, and Tyndale's commentary, Anderson's commentary of Old Testament. And I would really recommend grabbing those. It really helps with understanding the context, and they really give a lot of the historical context of what's going on, because again, the Hebrews used a lot of Near Eastern mythology to incorporate, but again, they're coming from the God. Yahweh is the only God, and that all these other false gods, that the Canaanites, the Egyptians, and the other nations worship are all false gods, and they have no power. Only Yahweh has that power. and that's important. So again, we're going to go ahead. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be back in a few minutes,